So now that we've talked about materials for models, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the techniques. So we're going to show you some of the pieces that we're going to be working with and some of the ways of working with these materials. We already talked about basswood, which we can get in various cuts and sizes, and dowels. We're going to talk first of all about how to do turnings. So these are all different little turnings that have been created using a knife and some basswood. This was cut from a square piece. You can see the square original cut of that piece of wood. And then we've created kind of a baluster or a hand railing of some sort. And then here was a piece of dowel that's still in process of being cut into a smaller piece. Here's an example of some legs that were created using dowels, and we'll recreate some of these pieces to give you an idea of how to use some carving techniques to get these pieces. We're going to need a good blade, and actually one of your best blades is probably one of these little pen knives. And you can do some work with a regular mat knife, but those are actually too large for the delicate work we're going to be doing here. And it depends on your finished look of whether or not you're going to want to start with a square piece of wood or a round piece of wood. That's kind of your choice. We'll start with a round just to kind of demonstrate our process. So here's a piece of dowel, and what I'm actually going to do to create this is I would first start with a pattern of some sort of what I want it to look like. So I would render out in quarter scale the size of the actual piece that I want. Let's say I want a 3-foot piece, and I know that I want it to be plain at the ends and then have a round knob, and then a round knob in the center as well. So I'm going to first sketch it out so I get an idea of what shape I want it to be. So I've got kind of a little pattern that I'm going to use, and that's what I'm going to compare my piece of wood to as I'm working on it and cutting with it. So I'm going to lay my piece of wood next to that, and I'm going to start from the outside and start working in. If I start in here and cut the wood, I'm going to weaken the entire piece. It'll snap off a lot easier. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to mark my first piece for me there. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to score to the cut, which means that I'm going to place my knife on that first cut mark right there. And I'm going to just keep the blade as a steady pressure. I'm going to use this hand to roll it back and forth. So I'm going to roll the piece to get a nice clean cut down into the piece of wood. And you may not be able to see that very well yet, but I'm going to do that one, and then I'm going to do the second one too, just so I have both of them side by side. Every time I make a cut there, I've weakened the wood a little bit, so I have to be somewhat careful. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make the little ball cut by starting and pointing towards my cut that I've made and cut into it. And what I'm actually doing is using the sharpness of my blade as I'm cutting. I'm not pushing into the wood straight, I'm cutting a little bit of an angle and using the sharpness of my blade to cut into and groove that wood. And you'll notice that it breaks off right at the cut that I've been making. And then I'll go all the way around until I've got a fairly good cut like that. Hopefully you can kind of sort of see that when we place something behind it so you can see it maybe just a little better. I've cut in there. And then I want to cut the other direction into my other groove. So now I'm going to be cutting into the wood this direction. And I want to be kind of careful that I don't cut into myself, obviously. But I'm not making, it doesn't take a lot of pressure to actually cut this. And as I'm cutting this, I don't have much to hold on to, so I'm going to move my hand up the stick just a little bit more. And I'm just going to slowly turn it as I go. Keep cutting into my slice or my groove that I've already cut into the wood. It's easiest to move slowly. I can always add more. It's hard to come back and fix it if I took out too much, right? Now I've got, I'm just going to kind of roll that in my fingers, use my hand kind of as a sandpaper. Now I've got that first kind of cut groove for my turning right there. I'm going to go back to my pattern and mark my second cut. And show you a little bit of a different technique that might be easier for some of you. I'm going to roll again and cut my groove. That's not going to change. I'm going to cut both sides of it. Okay. So I've got my other little grooves cut there. Now, I'm going to actually use a whittling position. So if I were to cut into this wood, it might be easier for me to actually, well, I'm finding it actually easier to do it this way, but sometimes when you're carving wood, you actually cut towards your own finger. So you just hold the knife and carve towards your thumb. Your thumb helps steady the end of the wood just a little bit more. Some people prefer this method, whittling down kind of, sort of, to the groove, but you're making such miniature little cuts that I'm not sure it's too important to do it this way. Some people might just feel more secure in kind of whittling towards there. It's kind of important, if you're cutting this direction, I'm cutting towards the part of the wood that's now a little more fragile because I've already cut into it. So I just have to be somewhat careful. And sometimes you're going to find that maybe you didn't groove it well enough and there are little tiny pieces of wood still standing up. So once you're done, just put your knife along that groove and roll the wood one last time. It'll cut off those last pieces and they'll just fall away. And now I want to cut the other direction. This is a fairly easy cut that we're doing here. I'm going to maybe do something that's a little more tricky here in just a moment. And now I've got my double little grooves here. And I'm going to change my pattern now just so you see another technique. I'm going to change this last part of it to be an actual leg. So I want this to be shaped down in a ball at the end of the leg. So now here's my new design. And so I have to shape this wood down to a ball. Let me, whoops, get a pencil here and mark where the ball is going to be. So I've marked that off. And I'm going to score it down to the groove. It's tricky to make sure you get that exactly straight into the wood, but you need it there. And I need that one fairly deep because I'm going to cut clear down to a ball. Now for this one I'm cutting a lot more wood, so I can start back further if I want to as I'm working with it. But I have a little less control if I do that. So I tend to start close to the notch to remove some of the wood. And I'm doing longer cuts, you might notice, as I'm doing this, peeling off a little more wood at this time. And this is kind of delicate. I'm cutting down to a very delicate part. And so a lot of pressure could snap my stick very quickly. I want to be kind of careful with that. In fact, if I were actually doing this from the top instead of, I hadn't planned it terribly well, I probably would have been smart to have done the foot down at this end, so I could have carved with a nice strong piece of wood to help support it. That makes sense. That if I were cutting this, I would probably start and cut this direction. That would be my first cut, and then I would have the strength of the wood to help me get this in here. Right now, I'm going to actually go to whittling position because I feel like I have a little more control on the wood when I do this. And so I'm going to whittle down to the bottom of the leg. And again, I'm just taking off small pieces as I go. And I'm getting those little shavings that are going to hang on there until I then run through the turn again with a knife and pull them all off. Okay, so now I'm getting that little bit of a turn. That is supposed to be a ball, so that means I need to cut from this side down into it just a little bit. Cut that edge off a wee bit. Not too hard to do. Just want to make sure it's somewhat regular all the way around. That's the trickiest part. And again, I repeat, it's just so much easier to make sure that I'm taking off little tiny pieces at once. I can always come back and take off more. So I've shaped that one now just a little bit. Time to cut to the bottom of the claw. Leg. Looks like I think I cut that one. Maybe I didn't. Let me lay that back next to my pattern. I may have just willed it all off. Nope. There it is right there. I'm going to shape that with a nice groove, fairly deep. Okay, so my last cut is into that last groove. Laying the whole thing along my whole palm of my hand, the ball of my thumb there to give it strong support so that there's a good support for that entire piece of wood. Because as I get down to this fine-tune part of the cut, I'm working in a very delicate area. The wood is not very strong at this point. Looks like I may have cut off a little much on that part. Not too bad. And it's going to always look a little bit irregular because I'm not using a lathe or anything to cut this. Then I'm going to do one last roll. I don't tend to try to cut this off completely with the blade. You can. I can snap that off if I want to. I always kind of sort of prefer to let a little bit of wood hang on to it, and then at the last minute I snap it off. I tend to like that just a little better. I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and just lightly rub the bottom of that leg on the sanding block there. I can use that to kind of round it out just a little bit also. And now I've got myself a nice little leg piece that I could reproduce. Go back and check it with my pattern. It's not too bad. Looks pretty good. And then I'd be ready to go right on to the next piece. And again, I'm going to switch that around and go the other direction in reality. Okay, let's say we're doing something different. Let's take a square piece of wood and try to get a different kind of look. So here is our actual dimension of our wood, and I'm going to just trace it on there so I know what it's like. And I want this to have nice square ends. And then I'm going to actually cut this and shape it just a little bit. So this is going to be my cut. This is the pattern I'm going to use. And I'll start here and roll my wood over to my first cut, which is going to be right here. Now I can't roll my wood as well on this one, so I'm going to use a little bit of a sign back and forth, kind of at an angle. Can you kind of see that? Here this way and then this way, just a little bit. But I want a fairly straight edge, and I'll roll it to another side. and rock it. Sometimes that works. It would have been probably smart to make sure and draw my line all the way around, because there can be a tendency for you to start spiraling as you cut, and then you come to your last side and it doesn't actually match. That can be kind of tricky. Now I'm going to do something a little different to this one than I did to the other one. I'm going to go ahead and mark my top block as well, because that's where it's going to start. And I'm going to take my own advice and mark all 4 sides of this one. Because what I want to happen is all this area in between these 2 block ends, and I'll go ahead and finish that last mark just so you see how the pattern works. Okay. These are going to be the square ends, but this is going to be round in the center. So now I'm going to want to actually carve that out a little bit. I'm going to kind of carve the corners first, mark those down, let them go down to the cut, to the groove. And now I'll do the, I'm doing that where you can see that. It's kind of hard to tell because I can't look through the camera while I'm doing this. Oops, I should take a lot off the face there because it's already flat. I'm just trying to round that all out so I have a nice round feeling down to my square. And then what I think I would do is I would go ahead and complete that cut down to the next box edge. So I'm going to cut that last groove in there, so I've already got it. Okay. And then I'm going to cut into that one. And I find it easier to cut towards myself, just like my mother told me never to do, right? Okay. And I do want a little bit off the face, I guess, because I do want that indentation. So I'm kind of looking at the shape of this and saying, well, maybe I want a little more off here. So I'm fine-tuning this cut. Okay. So there we go. And I'm moving this rather quickly for you just so it's not so boring. And I want to get this last detail that I have in the middle here. And this is kind of a rounded piece, so I'm just going to roll it in to get a nice notch in there. And I spiraled a little bit, so I'm going to go back and just kind of clean that up a little bit. It's kind of hard to roll it because I'm going from flat surface to flat surface. And I'm going to do the other side of that same cut. You probably can't see this quite yet, but you will in just a minute. Okay, so whether or not you can tell or not that I've kind of got this ridge cut into the wood. And then I'm going to round this off to that cut just a little bit all the way around. So I'm kind of chipping into the notch a little bit. Okay, and then at that point, I'm going to cut this wood on, out. This would be so much faster if I were lathing this, and they actually have little lathes you can use, or I could be using a Dremel tool, couldn't I? If any of you use a Dremel, you'll be going, why are you doing this all by hand? Well, just show it can be done. Somewhat delicate to do, but it can be done. I want to notch this down just to get the ball of that actual detail in there. Okay. And then I'm going to whittle that down against the knob that I just created, just a wee bit. Once I get the first one done and I kind of figured out the best approach to it, it's pretty easy to do a bunch of other ones using the pattern, of course. Maybe I have to fine-tune the pattern just a little bit because now that I've cut with it, I realize what I want to be able to do. And that's not too bad. Got a kind of a nice look to that piece. You can see that or not. Let me again put it against a piece of paper so you can see it better. And then I'm ready to cut this off. But as I was saying, just use the pattern and put on a movie and sit there and just kind of whittle these out one at a time, and you can have a whole full balustrade all done, a whole railing all completed. Now that was a square cut, so I just went ahead and finished that one off. And I'll sand off the bottom edge of it. And now I've got myself a nice little cut piece that's square on the two ends and round in the center. And it's not, again, perfect, but for doing little miniatures, I think it's going to do pretty well. I'll pull that one back up. Here is another one made out of a thicker square piece. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of some turnings and how to do some of those by hand. And you can see kind of the fine work in pulling down to a knob on these and then doing the little ball joint at the top there. Get those complete. I've been doing it over a piece of paper, which makes it nice because I can catch all my little shadings and get rid of them. I wanted to show you also some other cutting techniques for flatwood. When you're cutting with basswood, there's a grain to it. I've already mentioned that. It's best to cut with the grain as much as you can as you're thinking about that. So let's say we wanted to make a tabletop like this one. So here's a table that's already been created out of basswood, and I've notched in the center to suggest it's a pull-open table. It really isn't in reality, but we can do that. So I'm going to use it as a template, and I'm going to just actually draw that on my lumber here. So there's my plate here at the top of my table, and I'm going to have rounded corners to it. When I cut these, again, I would do a cut off of the ends I want to get rid of, so I'm going to use a larger knife. I'll get a cleaner cut. When I'm cutting with this kind of a knife, there's more possibility of turning and getting irregular shapes out of it, which is great when you want irregular shapes. But if I want a nice straight cut, then I'm smartest to actually pull my blade through. Now, if I were really smart, I would lay something to cut against to get a really nice straight cut. Plastic is not the best. We've already talked about that. It doesn't work the best. I'm going to do it very quickly, and I'm just going to score it. I don't want a full cut there. I just want to score where I'm going to be cutting this later on. And now I'm going to use that as a guide. And it's going to take multiple cuts to get this. I know that. And I'm not going to try to get through it in one. I'm going to just slowly pull my blade. I'm trying to get as straight a cut as I can. I'm trying to keep my blade very vertical. And I can feel that I'm cutting against the grain. It doesn't really want to go very well. It doesn't like that. I'm going to go with the grain now on this side. And you can't see this first one that I'm doing. This will cut very quickly. But when you're cutting with the grain, it wants to sometimes pull the direction of that grain because no grain is completely vertical. It's got a little bit of curve to it. It does some interesting ins and outs, and it would like to pull you along that. So you might have to fight it just a little bit. But I'm going to be even more careful while I'm pulling with the grain because the wood will split very quickly. And it's already cut. It's ready to just snap off and say, I'm done. And it'll snap against the grain, of course. With the grain, I should say. And then my last cut, I've already grooved a little bit so I can just pull it. again, I'm cutting across the grain, so I'm going to take multiple cuts to get that completely done. And then I'm going to niche off each of the corners because hope you noticed when I showed you that table that it had rounded corner edges on it. So I'm going to just cut those off a little bit because I want to smooth it all out. And you're going to see that there's a little bit of a rounded edge there. So I've actually taken my sandpaper and worked around the corners and slowly created what I wanted shape-wise, and then rounded my top edges down. So I wound up with the top edge of the table all the way around. You don't need a very large grain sandpaper because bass is fairly soft wood. One also nice thing about sanding these once you're done is it's sanding away all my pencil lines that I've drawn on there too, so I now don't have to worry about pencil lines being left. I'm hurrying my process a little bit just to show you, of course, so I would probably take a little more time, but that's a fairly nice little tabletop there. And then, of course, what I did to finish that one off there was I just took my knife and I did a nice little notch out of it to get the finished piece. But that's a really nice piece of wood ready to be used as a tabletop. I just need to cut the different side pieces to it and legs, and I can do my leg shaping or whatever I needed to do to get this one had straight legs. Other ones have a little more. You already seen that one. And that's just a regular tabletop done also. I do all my cutting first and then glue everything all at the last because I don't want to mix my sawdust and my cutting with my glues. Okay, that gives you those ideas there. And when I do glue, I want to get rid of all my sawdust because that will just glunk up everything that I'm trying to do. So it's important that you do a full cleanup, get a nice hand brush, get rid of all that sawdust. Okay, when I'm gluing, I want to get rid of all my nice boards, everything around. I want to save my tabletop by putting paper down here. And so I have a couple of legs that I want to apply to this, finish off this little bench stool that I've gotten. So it's a nice little top that I've created here. Does need a little bit of sanding. I'll have to maybe complete that just a little bit, but I can finish that when I'm completely done. It's best to have all your pieces completely finished before you start gluing it together, and because you're going to get splinters and you don't want the splinters to get in the way. You want nice clean edges when you start gluing things together. Okay, when I'm ready to start gluing these, get these legs on there, I've learned not to ever try to put my glue directly onto my model pieces. It's just not a good idea because the glue is going to come out in a lump, first of all. So I'm going to actually place my glue in a line on my paper. Close that up. Let's set it aside. I don't need that for a while now. And then I'm going to use that to get my glue where I need it. I can put my pieces directly into the glue, right, like this. And you'll see that I still have little balls on it, but then I can just wipe those off, kind of get them cleaned edges. I can do a side and get it somewhat cleaned off also. I just need a little bit of glue on there. And the glue, having been on paper, is starting to already set, which is to my advantage. Because now when I actually place my leg in place, I'm not going to have as much glue going all over the place, but I'm going to have some. So you'll notice that some of the glue is oozing out in different locations. I go back instantly with a nice pointed blade, and I pull out the glue where I don't want it, and I wipe it off. Got a nice Kleenex here for doing that, keeping the blade clean as much as possible. But I don't want all that extra glue. I don't want big balls of glue on there. It's going to dry clear, but it's still not terribly attractive. And when I try to paint, I would rather have the raw wood. So I'm just pulling all the glue off, getting rid of it. Or I don't want that glue. Okay, that's got that nicely in place. Now, a better maybe way of doing that is to take something like this, a nice T-pin, and to place the glue where I'm going to want it, and as much as I want, on the model piece itself, and then set the leg in place. It grabs very quickly because, again, it's been sitting here and drying. Therefore, I've got some really good sticky glue there. I'm best to leave that model piece sitting upside down somewhere, let it set really well, but you'll see that it sticks fairly quickly because I'm using the glue out in the air. It's staying very well. So, if I want to cut mat board, I'm going to use multiple cuts. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the length of my piece exactly how I want it. So I know how big it needs to be. I'm going to use my ruler to get a nice good straight edge. Do you know how to do that? Do you know how to use a mark on this side and a mark on that side to line it up? Okay, that works out fairly well to get a nice straight cut. And then I'm going to use my metal ruler, which I don't seem to find here. You can do a nice hand cut if you want to. Again, if you pull a line, it comes straight towards you. Using a cutting board, multiple cuts. Slowly work your way through it, keeping the blade vertical as much as possible. Especially a little knife like this can turn a lot on you and give you weird angles, which you might want somewhere else, but probably not on a straight cut like this. Then, gluing this. I don't want to glue it on the cut board. Not a good idea, because I don't want glue on that cut board ever, 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 ever. I'm going to use my glue that's already on the table, and I'm going to lay my board into it and pick up glue along the edge to make sure it gets glue all the way along the edge. And then I'm going to use the paper to pull off the excess glue on both sides, because I don't want any extra glue. I only want the glue that's needed to make the actual blend. Now, the best way to do this is to set the board just a little bit off of where you want it to be, and then use your finger from behind and push it into place. That'll push some of the extra glue out if there is any extra glue, and it'll place your piece exactly where you want it. Again, because this glue has been airing out, it is extremely sticky and will grab very quickly. And so I've got a very nice seal that quick. It's done. You're probably best to do it on its side and do it next to an object, or if it's vertical, stand something next to it and slide up to it to make sure you've got a perfect 90-degree angle. Let that sit for a while, get it all well set. You're going to find that when you use this Sobo glue, which is a really nice premium craft glue, that it, when I try to pull this apart, or if I try to pull this apart, the paper will tear before the glue will let go. Even now, I'm going to guess that, yep, the paper already is pulling away. And so if that happens, then I could just simply place some glue back between the layers of paper. And reconstitute the paper the way it used to be, and it will re-glue it back into place. Because this glue is so strong, I do not use it to place my objects on my model. I don't dip those in there and then stick them on the model, because when I want to remove those pieces, I want to move my furniture around. If I pull that up, it's going to tear pieces of my actual black mat board or black foam core or whatever I'm using, and that is not ideal. So I'm better off to spot this with rubber cement or even a low melt hot glue and then stick it onto my models, because those I can actually pull out of and I can roll off the extra glue and get rid of it and move my furniture around. So here are pieces that have been made out of basswood. The last part of that process, of course, would be to actually paint these. I really like to use acrylic paints. A good burnt umber will get you this kind of a color right there. A burnt sienna is more of this color. This is actually made with matte board, but that's a burnt sienna. And then when I'm completely done, I use a matte or a gloss medium just to paint over the top, water-based. And then it gives a nice sheen and makes it look like these are completely finished pieces that have been varnished, or that full look of the wood that you want. So it's pretty easy to make your own pieces. Takes a little bit of time to do the turnings. These two both need to be stained, obviously. That was a good demonstration that you have to be very careful because you have glue out, not to lay your arm in it, not to lay pieces into it. But at this point, once everything has been cut, I would then assemble all the pieces. I would do all the wall pieces, lay them all flat, get them painted, do all the work that needs to be done on them, and then assemble the model in stages, usually working from upstage to downstage, but it's kind of your own preference. Sometimes you can start center stage and work out, but the point is you don't want to reach across or break off pieces while you're putting another piece on. So sometimes you have to just think through your building process to get everything there. I find it easiest to get all the walls and complete finished pieces, so I get the doors in place, I get the frames around all the doors, I do any windows or anything I need to do to the walls and get them completed, and then I'm ready to assemble the entire model. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of what you can do as you're working on your models, how to get them completed, and you're ready now to do your first color models.